Wonderful grace by my Savior I stand. Will there be any stars in my crown? Will there be any stars in my crown? When at evening the sun goeth down, when I wake with the blessed in those mansions of rest, will there be any stars in my crown? In the strength of the Lord, let me labor and pray. Let me watch as a winner of souls, that bright stars might be mine in that glorious day. Will there be any stars in my crown? Will there be any stars in my crown? When at evening the sun goeth down, when I wake with the blessed in those mansions of rest, will there be any stars in my crown? What a joy it will be when my face to behold, living gems at its feet to lay down. It would sweeten my bliss in that city of gold, if there be any stars in my crown. Will there be any stars in my crown? When at evening the sun goeth down, when I wake with the blessed in those mansions of rest, will there be any stars in my crown? Some bright morning when this life is over, I'll fly away to that home on God's celestial shore.
Hi, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good noon, whatever time zone you're joining us from. We'll go ahead and get started right now. I broke my sides switching from the lovely music to our faces, but let me get things reorganized. And I'm so glad that you are all here today with us. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Rise, a Feminist Book Project for ages 0 to 18. RISE has been promoting quality feminist literature for young readers since 2002 as a part of the Feminist Task Force and the Social Responsibilities Roundtable. Each year, the project compiles an annotated book list of well-written and well-illustrated books with significant feminist content intended for young readers aged birth to 18. Today, we'll be considering the evolution of the book list and feminism over the last 2 decades. We'll be sharing reflections from previous committee members and considering the still necessary work of getting feminist books to young readers. My name is Sylvia Lynn Hannick, and I am one of the co-chairs of this year's committee. And I am joined today by my co-chair, Jean-Louise Zancanella, and former co-chairs, Kelsey Keys and Melissa Nemitz. We'll start today by offering a brief history of the committee. Asked to define feminism in 2021 with 3 words, Jennifer Baltes asked for 4 and offered damned hard work still. We've adopted this as a committee catchphrase of sorts and as the title of today's webinar. As we've reflected on and analyzed the last 2 decades of this committee, we were humbled and inspired by all that has been accomplished, but also newly convinced of the urgency and relevancy of our ongoing work. Also a founding member of the committee, Jennifer shared our origin story. She wrote, Nell Ward and I had just finished our terms on the PPYA and Prince committees, and we were coming off that ALA midwinter conference hard work high. We were feeling at a loss and wondering what might be our next opportunity to make our voices heard. We bemoaned the lack of publishing of and recognition for feminist books for youth, not feisty or plucky heroines, blech. We wanted girls to have books with strong female characters who solve problems, collaborate with others, and make their way through without caving to convention or batting their eyes coyly. Over beers in a brewery in Washington, D.C., we made our plans on a cocktail napkin, no lie. At ALA Annual 2001, we walked the convention floor and talked to dozens of publishers about our idea. We begged for review copies for our committee, bought a few books to share around, used CERT's letterhead to give us some cred, and just pushed through. We made it happen. We learned from the bottom up how to reach out to marketing reps, book rooms for meetings, and organize a breakfast program. 3 or 4 years later, publishers started reaching out to us and asking for a mailing list to send review copies. Books that were recognized began to sport the asterisk and ads. We knew the list mattered. That moment was when we knew it mattered to publishing and would make a difference. We are so grateful to our founders for identifying the need for this book list and for making it happen. But we are also grateful for the choices they made to ensure that it was not only the content of the list that would be feminist, but also the structure. Nell Ward, also a founding member, explained the choice to establish a book list rather than an award by saying, the purpose was to select books by an area of interest that ALA had not provided for young people. A list of books instead of an award was chosen because the list provides access to a larger selection of titles for both purchasers and readers of books, end quote. The choice to build a broad list rather than appointing one book as the best feminist book of the year was, we argue, a feminist choice that prioritized representation and community over prestige. The committee then and now also strives to demonstrate feminist values in action by engaging with members as whole people, resisting patriarchal ideas like competition and limiting emotion. Jane Cawthron, another founding member who I think is in the audience today, wrote about the consensus-based deliberation process still used by the committee today. She said, I know that small groups of dedicated people can create change. It requires perseverance and willingness to put in the necessary work. Intentionally including provisions for consensus meant that everyone on the committee had not only the chance to speak up, but also the responsibility. And that includes the responsibility to be willing to change one's mind when ideas and information warrant change, end quote. Ariana Hussein, a committee member from 2020 to 2021, noted that, quote, the deliberate framing of the committee to consider not only the books on hand, but the people at the table and their individual needs, viewpoints, and ongoing trauma and fatigue really impacted me. Also, seeing the willingness of committee members to do the real work of confronting people and to hold them accountable will be something I will carry with me in standing up for myself, my communities, and for justice, end quote. Joy Warland, a committee member from 2011 to 2015, said that, quote, the commitment to consensus and a safe space to passionately yet respectfully disagree is one of the greatest things I have ever experienced, end quote. While we can't speak for all past committee members, the four of us treasure the uniquely respectful and supportive nature of our committee deliberations and the safety we felt in being honest and vulnerable when talking about the challenging content we encounter in feminist books. Next, Kelsey will situate Rise among ALA awards and then guide us through changes to the way that feminism has been defined over 20 years.
Okay, so on this first slide, I have just a brief overview of some of the major ALA book awards and lists. And as many of you know, Newbery's at its 100-year anniversary. So you can see I've grouped them into three loose categories based on time. The first is the oldest and arguably the most well-known awards, the Newbery and the Caldecott, established in 1922 and 1937, respectively. Then in green in the middle there, we have four more awards that were established in the 1960s and 70s, including the Coretta Scott King and Stonewall Awards. And finally in yellow, we have five more, like the awards from the 60s and 70s, are more specific and identity-focused awards and lists, and this includes the Rise book list. I share this to situate the Rise book list amongst a history of ALA awards and to show how the priorities or focus of ALA awards and book lists has shifted over time. Certainly compared to Newbery and Caldecott, Rise is a relatively young book list, although 20 years is still a great accomplishment. But we would argue that the need for feminist books for young readers was and is urgent and necessary. Of course, the Rise book list and feminism have evolved over the 20 years that Rise has been around. The introductions written for each year's book list by that year's committee provide insight into the evolution of the book list and of feminism. So I went through and I analyzed 20 years worth of Bloomer and Rise introductions and found that they're a really good indicator both of how the committee has grown and changed over 2 decades, as well as what has remained the same, because there were certainly some enduring themes. Especially in the early years, the introductions always thank the publishers for choosing to publish feminist books in the first place, which indicates that 20 years ago, there were a lot fewer feminist titles being published than what we see now. At the same time, as the years passed, more and more of the introductions began to call out publishers and encourage them to publish more feminist books, and particularly to move beyond stereotypes of spunky or feisty girls. It becomes clear through the introductions that the committee was really honing in on what they considered feminist books, and that it certainly meant more than simply having a female protagonist. I also found it really interesting that a full 75% of the introductions specifically mentioned the current political climate. The most common phrase I saw in looking at the 20 years of introductions is something along the lines of feminism being needed now more than ever. Many of the early introductions spend time outlining the current political climate as to justification for the need of a feminist book list. Early introductions focus on female stereotypes, the idea of empowerment, and language around strong women overcoming obstacles, trailblazing, and/or breaking boundaries. The inaugural introduction states that year's books, quote, provide role models of strong, capable, creative women, and enthuses, quote, these books show girls and women exploring exciting ways to solve practical dilemmas through the courage of their convictions. All of them spur the imagination and expand the limits of dreams while confronting traditional female stereotypes, end quote. Similarly, the 2003 introduction says that the books on that year's list, quote, spotlights girls and women breaking the bonds forced on them by society, defying stereotypical expectations, and then continues, within these pages, girls and women overcome the obstacles of the intersecting forces of race, gender, and class. Readers discover feminists who actively shape their destinies, blazing paths for themselves and those who follow, end quote. The 2004 introduction, quote, celebrates girls and women as a vibrant, vital force in the world and emphasizes the need for, quote, books depicting strong, self-actualizing girls and women who solve problems, gain personal power, and empower others to reach their goals, end quote. Similar language is used throughout the rest of the aughts. Over the early years, it is clear that the committee is becoming clearer and clearer on its guidelines for what they consider a feminist book. By 2009, there's a notable shift with the assertion, quote, we need not just cardboard, feisty, or spunky female characters, but tales of girls and women who have broken barriers and fought to change their situations and their environment. After this, the introductions begin to shift toward increasingly active language. In the middle years, there's also still a lot of focus on the individual and their ability to change their own situation. For example, the 2007 introduction says that year's list, quote, features girls taking charge of their situations despite obstacles. And 2009 states the list includes books that bring to light the stories of women who break boundaries and girls demanding to be accepted for who they are. The books encourage and inspire girls to be smart, brave, and proud. And in 2009, it says, we must find within ourselves the bravery and conviction to keep fighting. So in these early and then somewhat into the middle of years, the focus is often on stereotypes and the individual overcoming barriers once they are empowered. Empowered is a word I saw a lot. There's a shift in 2012 and 2013. 2012 still uses the language of strong women and girls, but also starts to really emphasize voice. Quote, in these books, women claim their voices through the confluence of revolutionary politics and artistic expression. Loud and self-possessed, they would not be silenced, end quote. 2013 introduction bridges this as well, using language of, quote, women and girls finding their individual and collective voices, but also stating, our hope is that the stories, messages will inspire readers to find their own voices and join the fight to empower all women. By 2015, the introductions start including multiple titles of the books that were included on that year's list, a trend that continues in future years. And the introductions become more thematic rather than describing or focusing on current events. There continue to be more calls to action in 2016 and onward, and we begin to see more of a shift to a collective movement. It is also worth noting that all of the introductions from these years focus on girls and women specifically. 2005 sees the first suggestion in an introduction that men play a role in feminism, mentioning men with a sentence, quote, the struggle for women's rights in the United States has been a history of strong, heroic, fascinating women and men working to change the prevailing trends of society. Men, and then for the first time, boys were again mentioned in 2009. Quote, we, girls and boys, women and men, now more than ever need positive feminist role models. We need to be reminded that brave women and men paved the way to the rights we enjoy today. We need to see a new future with greater equality for all, regardless of gender. And then by 2018, we have an introduction that includes language about all genders. So moving away from that binary as well. So that changed over the introductions. In January 2020, the committee name changed from the Amelia Bloomer Project to RISE, a feminist book project for ages 0 to 18. And the introduction that year reflects on this change. The intro that year demands institutional change, challenges systemic racism. This language is a big shift from the empowerment and inspiration and the focus on the individual that we see in earlier introductions. It's also the first real mention of systemic issues. It's not until 2021 that white supremacy is mentioned by name. That introduction reads, quote, "We must continue to reckon with the white supremacy on which this country was built and continue to voice the truth that Black lives matter. The work continues. We are inspired by women who have used their voices for change, lifting the voices of other women. We need to lead with more than just words. We need to lead with action." And then finally, just for fun, I took all 20 years worth of the introductions and made a word cloud, which you can see here, which is just kind of fun to see the words that we use over and over again. Next, Melissa will talk about two important changes to the committee, one private and one very public.
So for a few years in a row, all members of the committee identified as white. And while members represented a range of other diverse identities, racial diversity was not being represented. In 2018, the committee co-chairs took a closer look at the application of the committee to identify a solution. This, however, was not a problem that was unique to our committee. ALA has long been committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a number of initiatives and partnerships, and with diversity listed as one of ALA's key action areas. ALA and other libraries across the country have committed to attracting, retaining, hiring, and promoting BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color personnel, including librarians. But in spite of these efforts, librarianship has remained demographically homogeneous compared to the general population and to the communities that we serve. A 1998 ALA report on racial and ethnic diversity among librarians found that over 86% of academic, public, and school librarians self-identified as white. And nearly 2 decades later, in 2017, the ALA membership survey respondents, 86.7 self-identified as white. So you'll notice that those two numbers are very similar, but without discounting ALA's efforts and those made by other professional organizations, it's clear that racial diversity remains a challenge for our profession. So it's not surprising that racial diversity is also a challenge for our committee, but this lack of diversity in the profession doesn't make it okay. Our committee could not and cannot champion intersectional, anti-racist feminism with a persistently all-white committee. In revisiting the committee application, the co-chairs realized that there was nowhere for an applicant to mention their identities, racial or otherwise. And if this wasn't asked, the burden would be on the applicant to find a place to mention how they deviate from the white, cis, heterosexual, able-bodied norm. Furthermore, default. Furthermore, without a direct question about identities, there wasn't a clear way for co-chairs to give direct points for the valuable lens that they could offer the committee. So while these charts don't represent the in-depth and complex conversations that we have when evaluating applicants, I hope they illustrate the change that we needed to make if we wanted to value racial diversity and actively recruit BIPOC committee members. We needed to literally assign value to their contributions. So as a result of these conversations, the following questions were added to the application. What lenses, expertises, and or specialized knowledge would you bring to the committee's work? And how do your identities inform your feminism and its intersections with other social justice work? And while there is always always more work to be done there. These changes to the structure of the application have led to diverse committee membership, richer conversations, and a stronger book list. Next, I will take a look at another committee change motivated by our commitment to feminism in action as well as name. The conversation about changing the name of the committee originated when the co-chairs contacted a publisher in 2019 for review copies of a nominated title. This publisher responded to our request, asking that their title be removed from nomination, the reason being that they did not want their book associated with a group named after Amelia Bloomer. We were surprised by this unexpected feedback from a publisher, but took their concerns seriously. And for those who don't know, Amelia Bloomer lived during the 19th century and was a vocal advocate for women's rights, the temperance movement, and dress reform. Bloomer also created and edited a newspaper dedicated specifically to women, which ultimately focused on women's rights. However, when confronted with the question regarding her stance on the fugitive slave law of 1850, Bloomer did not just remain silent, she refused to condemn it. And like so many of the early American suffragists, Bloomer chose to place the issues of white women over those of Black women and Black Americans. And the decision to change the committee name did not come easily. Over 20 years, the Amelia Bloomer Project had built credibility and trust within the library and publishing communities by recommending high-quality feminist literature for young readers. But given our discoveries about Bloomer's legacy, it felt contradictory to keep a name that no longer represented our committee's values, nor the values of the Social Responsibilities Roundtable and the Feminist Task Force. Still, the decision to change the name was not easy. Committee member Tiffany Fontenot described our efforts to change the name of the committee as a, quote, hard, necessary conversation. And on the other hand, Nell Ward shared that, quote, she will always regret the change of the title to Rise. I definitely understand the need for intersectionality, but Amelia Bloomer was typical of major feminists in the 19th century, if not more advanced. There is no denying that Bloomer's fierce advocacy for women, but as the list has evolved alongside modern day feminism, Bloomer's actions or lack thereof solidified the need for a name change that represents and reflects the committee's commitment to inclusion. And in the committee's official statement, we express, quote, certain FTF believe librarians and libraries must work to correct social problems and inequities with particular attention to intersectionality, feminism, and deliberate anti-racism. As a result, the committee unanimously voted in favor of a name change. Rise, a Feminist Book Project for ages 0 to 18, reflects the diversity and inclusion for which feminism as a whole and this committee specifically strives. And with the new name also came a new website and logo, and we are grateful to graphic designer Angelica Marie for creating a logo that effectively represents the committee's new name and mission in a visual manner. And next, I will talk about how the list has evolved over 20 years. So in reflecting back on 20 years of the committee, of course, we wanted to take a look at the numbers and see what we could glean from just the facts. And the following charts are a breakdown of the number of books that have been included on the list by year. When we create our list, we break up our titles into categories. And as it stands right now, the list is divided into early readers fiction, early readers nonfiction, middle grade fiction, middle grade nonfiction, young adult fiction, and young adult nonfiction. So looking at the chart of the number of books on the list per year turned out to be pretty hard to summarize. As you can see, there are no consistent upwards or downwards trends. We do see a tremendous increase within the past 2 years, but other than that, the numbers are very scattered. We would love to see a trend where the numbers continue to increase every year, but the focus of the committee has always been quality over quantity. And it is also important to keep in mind that we do not fill any quotas when it comes to categories. Each title is judged individually based on quality and significant feminist content. And in the next few slides, I'm going to break down some of the categories that showed the most significant trends. Historically, early readers fiction has been the least represented category on the list. However, you can see a huge jump from 2019 to 2020 in the number of picture books included on the list. And this includes a significant increase in the number of board books, which are probably some of the toughest books to discuss, believe it or not. And here you can see some pictures of book covers of picture books and board books that have been included on our list in the past few years. Now, looking at more consistent trends, two of the most significant and steady inclines have been in the early readers nonfiction and young adult fiction categories. Taking into account the explosion of the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as a greater acceptance of the exploration of gender and sexual identity, it is clear that publishers have focused on producing more titles, specifically in these two formats, which seem to be the most popular, that address these social justice issues, despite the fact that the publishing industry and this committee continue to be overwhelmingly white. In terms of publishing trends, that would account for an uptick in the early readers nonfiction category. The increase in the amount of picture book biographies being published that uncover important women from the past and books that highlight current significant women has definitely impacted our list. Some of the most frequent figures to appear include Malala Yousafzai, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Ada Lovelace, and Shirley Chisholm, just to name a few. In regard to young adult fiction, I think it's safe to say that the popularity of these titles by teens and adults alike only continues to grow, and not only in popularity, but in diversity of authors and characters as well. And this diversity and these voices have been underrepresented from the feminist narrative and feminist literature from the beginning. And it is my hope and the hope of the committee that these titles are not just the result of what is currently trending, but of a longer journey for the publishing industry to become fully inclusive and representative of voices that more accurately reflect the society we live in. In addition to reading level, another aspect of the list that we looked at was representation and how it evolved from year to year. Now, Jean Louise will take us through an analysis of the protagonists represented in our list and what we think the data means for the future of our committee.
So before we dive in, I want to take a few moments to explain the methodology we use to code our data. For this project, book lists starting the year of the committee's founding in 2002 were coded into 3 categories based on the protagonist or main subject of the book. The categories were white, BIPOC, and other/group. The other/group category included non-human protagonists like animals, inanimate objects, aliens, monsters, robots, etc., Works of nonfiction discussing more than one individual, or reference texts not focused on one individual, including guides and manuals. This methodology was chosen over author identity, as that would have required self-disclosure on the author's part, and we didn't want to guess incorrectly at a person's identity. Because of this, the analysis does not delve into the question of books about marginalized communities written by authors from privileged communities. We also did not break down which books were about real women, biographies, versus fictional women, which would likely provide more insight into publishing trends. In addition to exploring full lists, we also took a look at our top 10 titles. Top 10 lists are made up of books that receive unanimous yes votes before deliberations and are then voted on by members as a sampling of the best the list had to offer that year. And this slide shows a sampling of some of the titles that have made the top 10 over the years. The top 10 composition, or the top 10 began in 2012. And besides the first year of the top 10 list, when it did not include any BIPOC coded books, it had a larger percentage of BIPOC coded texts in earlier years than the full lists themselves. This could point to a larger trend in publishing, where there were fewer books with a diverse cast available, working in conjunction with an increasing understanding by committee members of the value of representation in books. This trend continues to the present year. It's especially possible that the mission of the committee guides the selection of the top 10 list when considering that the number of books on the list has increased nearly every year since its inception, meaning that there have been more options to choose from, and the committee has had to be more selective in narrowing down the books that best represent feminist writing and publishing from that year. This implies an active choice towards representation agreed upon by all members, which is also reflected in the introductions written by the committee post-deliberations, as Kelsey discussed. So from 2013 on, the list's diversity increases on a yearly basis, with books with BIPOC representation outpacing books with exclusively white representation on Rise's 2018 list, a trend which has continued every year after. The inclusion of group and other texts fluctuates much less than the other two categories throughout the years. One of the most common phrases used in referring to why representation matters in children's books is the idea of mirrors and windows. Coined by Angela Bronson in her brief but impactful 2016 article, Mirrors and Windows, Diversity in Children's Picture Books, Bronson argues that having children only see one type of race shown in picture books can affect them deeply. That is why I believe books should be used as mirrors and windows, reflecting who kids are, but also showing them someone who is different to expand their views. Diverse characters allow children to mirror themselves and have windows to others. So in recent years, the committee has worked to promote intersectionality and inclusivity as a core tenet of the feminism we represent, and that continues to be reflected in the composition of the list. Analysis of other marginalized identities, such as religion, sexuality, gender identity, neurodiversity, or disability represented in chosen texts would further illuminate how the list has evolved since it began. And this is an area of analysis that we're interested in exploring further, and welcome any interested collaborators to join, because it's a big job and there are a lot of books. To that point, Sylvia and Kelsey have written a forthcoming book chapter about the importance of using a cultural humility approach when selecting books for young readers. As a part of that project, Kelsey analyzed the composition of the Newbery and Caldecott winners. Her work there may be helpful for contextualizing our analysis of past lists, especially considering how our list is situated alongside other major book awards.
Almost forgot to unmute. Okay, as Jean Louise mentioned, I analyzed the composition of the Newbery and Caldecott winners. Over its 100-year history, so 99 awards, 66, this is, for the Newbery, 66 were awarded to women, 33 to men, and only 12 of the authors have been BIPOC. The first Black woman to win a Newbery was Virginia Hamilton, who won in 1975, and a Black man did not win the Newbery until 2000, and that was Christopher Paul Curtis. The Ralph Caldecott Medal has a similar history. It was first awarded in 1938 and has been awarded 84 times. Female illustrators have won 24 times, while male illustrators have won 54 times, and 6 times the Caldecott went to male-female couples. 76 of these Caldecott awards have gone to white illustrators, while merely 11 have gone to BIPOC. As shown in the chart, the protagonists of Caldecott winning books are overwhelmingly white as well. Of the 84 Caldecott winning books, 43 feature white protagonists and 16 feature BIPOC. However, it's worth noting that even of these 16 protagonists, a full half, so 8, are illustrated by white people. In other words, only 8 of the books featuring BIPOC protagonists were actually drawn by BIPOC illustrators. And 3 of those winners are from the past 5 years alone. More than 3 times this number of books, 25, feature animals as the protagonists. Illustrations in books are powerful, especially for pre-readers. And when the majority of protagonists in children's literature are either white or animals, many children will not see themselves or their families represented in the reading world. Furthermore, racial representation in literature for young readers both reflects and reinforces existing power structures, especially when it comes to award-winning books. Most every library with a children's collection, even those with extremely limited budgets, tend to prioritize purchasing award-winning books to add to their collections. Moreover, these books are the ones that tend to be highlighted and displayed by librarians, are frequently chosen by teachers to be taught or shared in their classrooms, and are more likely to be on the radar of parents and other caregivers who are looking for quality books to purchase for the children in their lives. So when a majority of award-winning books have white or animal protagonists, existing power structures are confirmed and spread by librarians, teachers, and caregivers who are reiterating that these are what quality books look like. This data speaks to the importance of RISE as an inclusive and intersectional list that elevates feminist voices and stories. As a younger committee and as a book list rather than an award, RISE's challenges in history are very different. Still, it's fair to say that the feminist focus of our work has helped to amplify a broader diversity of identities over the past 20 years. While creating a book list for young readers with significant feminist content is our charge, we argue that it is a charge that should be shared across the profession. All award winners and book list entries should be intersectional and feminist. Committee membership may be one way of accomplishing this goal. Changing the committee application changed the racial makeup of our committee. Changing the racial makeup of our committee changed the diversity of titles on the list. A more diverse committee leads to a more diverse list. Given the data we've seen about the whiteness of the profession, it is imperative that all book lists and book award committees join us in making changes that will promote books that truly reflect the communities that we serve. Now, Jean Louise will discuss the future of the RISE book list.
So throughout the process of preparing for this webinar, we spoke quite a bit about what the purpose of the list really was. We interrogated what we hoped it would be and what we thought it needed to be. We also acknowledged how the lists we created during our time on the committee likely would no longer be representative of what feminism will grow to be in coming years. Members must continue to ask questions like, how has feminism evolved since the inception of the committee? And is the list still serving those it is intended to? When thinking about how the list will continue to change to best reflect what feminism has become, it will be important to prioritize the much needed shift from predominantly white feminism to intersectional feminism as the default. This attitude was repeated by multiple former members. Joy Warland, who I believe is in the room today, a committee member who served from 2011 to 2015, wrote that she is now able to see complexity and fallibility of second wave feminism that she admired without much critique as she was growing up. Both Linda Parsons, who served from 2011 to 2016, and April Witteveen, who served from 2012 to 2014, noted the shift toward inclusivity within feminism since their years of service. Linda said, "I think feminism has been increasingly challenged to be more inclusive of Black and Brown sisters and their experiences. It is no longer a movement of middle-class white women, thankfully." April wrote, "Intersectionality in feminism has taken, rightly, a larger stage in the years since I served, and were I to serve again, the lens of intersectionality would be forefront in my mind based on my own evolution. I am more aware of the problematic issues in nice white lady feminism." Melissa, our co-presenter and committee member from 2016 to 2021, credited her time on RISE with teaching her, quote, "how insidious white feminism can be." She wrote that it is essential that feminism be inclusive and intersectional. Finally, we heard from Natasha Forrester Campbell, a committee member from 2018 to 2020, who succinctly captured the feminism in action we all aspire to. She wrote, "As a white woman, I knew that white feminism was a thing, but over the course of my 3 years on the committee, that understanding grew. I'm much more able to recognize it in action, both in myself, the media, conversations with others, and the materials I consume and recommend to others. And I'm more comfortable calling it out, pushing back against it and other types of misogyny, and being more active in my equity work." So this sentiment will almost certainly continue to inform how the committee moves forward from here. While it seems that certain areas of feminism are moving away from the assumption of the gender binary, people who identify as women are still more likely to experience violence and oppression, so the list's necessity remains. As you can see from the list, we've seen tremendous progress in the quantity of available feminist titles. Feminism in publishing has become an increasingly popular trend, which, while positive, puts even more responsibility in the hands of the committee. The list's standards must evolve as the market continues to grow. There's no longer a dearth of meaningful, important feminist books for ages 0 to 18, which means that the quality of the list can continue to improve and showcase a broad range of the best books available from a variety of presses. Ideally, the committee and hopefully the publishing industry will continue to reflect and uplift diverse voices. In addition to that, the committee must make every effort to foster a safe and welcoming place for members from all backgrounds to facilitate this important work. As Caitlin Brown, former co-chair and committee member from 2014 to 2019 noted, "I think reading and discussing 6 years worth of nominations, interesting books, field nominations, and publisher submissions has given me a lot of language and conceptual understanding to help with my lifelong work of helping to create the future I believe is possible," end quote. It is clear that the work of RISE does not end with committee membership. While there is no infallible method of measuring Feminist Project, our job is to continue to challenge hierarchies and react to the needs of marginalized communities who are best served by the list when it reflects them. One thing I think we can all agree on is that our work is far from done. Feminism is essential and feminism is for everyone, and it will continue to be the driving force behind this committee for the years to come. I'll end by quoting Christy Gibrich, a committee member from 2005 to 2010, who wrote, "As long as we're still fighting, there's still hope."
Thank you all so much for joining us today and for reflecting and sharing and celebrating 20 years of the Amelia Bloomer Project and RISE, a Feminist Book Project for ages 0 to 18. We want to take this moment to recognize all of the committee members who are in attendance today. If you served or are currently serving on this committee, will you take this opportunity to say hello in the chat? You can share your years of service or a memorable title that made it onto the list. And I want to thank Christina Dorr for sharing the origin of the phrase mirrors and windows in the chat as well. Thank you all so much for all you have done to shape and grow and sustain this committee. We stand on your shoulders and we are grateful for the opportunity to build upon your work each year. Now we want to invite questions and memories or any other memorable feminist books you've loved in the last 2 decades. I also at this point want to shout out some of the notable crafts that our survey of past members brought up. Some of you may remember Bubbles the fish, who continues to live comfortably with a long life, I think with Melissa. And also for those of you who are on the founding committee, several of you mentioned a set of bookmarks that each treasured for many, many years. So if there are any other, puppet bookmarks still sitting in your office, I hope you look at them today fondly.
if anybody would like bubbles back, it is again in my possession. I don't know its original origins, but if anybody does want it back, you can definitely message me.
Yeah, so Joy, I also took care of Bubbles one year, and I kept Bubbles on a high shelf away from my dogs. But it was lovely to share a year with their friendly little face. Vicky, Bubbles is a beautifully felted fish who looks like the brightest, most joyful sweater you've ever seen. Um, so he's real in our hearts, or they're real in our hearts. Oh, thank you. Okay, Jane, we'll reach out to you. I'm so glad to know that they have a home.
I love seeing Liz's memory about pumping in committees. I've only served on the committee 1 year in person because of the pandemic, but that has continued to be a theme and a wonderful supportive part of the committee.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jean Louise. So I think what some of the memories that didn't feel like a part of the official narrative, but that I feel so profoundly. Kelsey brought her baby to deliberations. Rosie made several insightful points. I was very nauseated during 1 year of deliberations in early pregnancy, and then also had to pump in a corner during deliberations. So I hope that's what I was hoping to capture with some of the conversation about honoring a person as a whole person, as a person who made a human or is making a human or needs to feed a human. It's lovely to be in a professional setting and have that acknowledged and supported.
And I know we said this early on in the webinar, but just as we did look into the history and thought about the structure of it, I think we all began to really appreciate how the founders had set things up, and that it was a feminist structure that also went out of its way to make way for real people and people with a lot of things going on in their lives. How the committee meetings are run.
Absolutely. And I think that the consensus-based structure of the committee is something that I myself have taken into my work outside of the committee, and I imagine that's true for a lot of people. And I do think that it's inherently a feminist practice.
Allison, I just want to mention that I have been using Consent for Kids with my 2.5-year-old, and was really grateful that it was already sitting on my shelf, because Consent for Kids really gets right to it. You don't have to hold on to an angry raccoon just because you said you would take care of it at first. Wendy, we've been working on the content of this webinar for the last year, and it has been a lovely way to engage with the structure and history and the ongoing work of this committee. And I think that there are future projects that we would like to explore. The goal was to present this information to all of you here today in celebration of the 20th anniversary, but we hope to also share some of this analysis more broadly in the future.
And there is that book chapter that was mentioned that Sylvia and I worked on, which is not focused on RISE, but just putting out there when I think that book's coming out soon-ish.
Forthcoming.
Who can say? Forthcoming.
Yeah, Mallory, and I think Ali is here, Cynthia, others, for those of you who are current members of the committee. Sarah, Vicky, I'm excited to spend many hours with you in next week. For those of you who served in the committee in an in-person format, I think that I was one of the members who had some in-person experiences, and then have been running deliberations the last 2 years virtually, and I really miss the snacks more than anything. It's, you know, it's the snacks, how lovely it was to sit in a conference room with or without windows. I remember my first year walking in and everyone was like, we got windows this year. So those of you who had the opportunity to sit together in a room for days on end in what I call the most intense book club discussion of your life, you know, I hope you'll reflect on that fondly as we sit there together next week, but on Zoom.
I agree, Sarah. I feel like it has been very different, but I think our committee members have made the process as seamless as possible considering the years we've had.
Yeah, more dogs are invited this way. And Mallory's cat, whose tail really looked like a human hand, so that when we were voting, it was hard to not count that vote. Did I just hear a cat? Is that me?
That's probably one of my children in the background.
It's like, did I conjure Mallory's cat into being? Into being?
Thank you all so much for coming today. And I mean, I do know we have a lot of past or current members here, and it means so much how when we're saying 20 years, and yes, that's younger than Caldecott, but 20 years is still really great. And that has happened because of very dedicated people.
Okay, so in the last minutes of our time together, I am going to plug some of our forthcoming output and you know, echo Kelsey in saying, yes, thank you all for coming today to share in the celebration and reflection. I also want to say thank you to all of the people who will be watching this after today, because you registered for the webinar knowing you couldn't make it and that it wasn't going to happen in the middle of the day. So for all of you who are watching this at 3 a.m. while nursing your new baby, or next Tuesday, because that's when you have time, hi, we're glad you're celebrating with us as well. I want to let everyone know to watch out for our top 10 to be announced during LibLearnX, and for the full list to be published shortly after the conference. And then also, notably, to let you all know that the application for the 2023 committee year will become available in late January. So please take the opportunity now to spread the word to those who might be a good fit for this work in this committee. You more than anyone will know what this entails and what it requires. Please locate those folks in your life now. The 2022 application, so the application for last year, is posted on our website now. We anticipate that it will remain mostly unchanged. So that would be something that people can start working on now. And once the application is posted, it should be open until about mid-February. So please watch out for those forthcoming events. And yeah, again, thank you all for being here. And we'll see you in some capacity either next week or otherwise. And yeah, just as people are leaving, I'm realizing I'm going to throw our website URL into the chat. That's actually how I broke my slides earlier, because I was trying to copy and paste while in full screen and it didn't work. So for those of you who are lingering a little, all 20 years worth of lists can be found at our website. All right, thanks, Monica.